A 15-year-old black boy was arrested for no reason, humiliated by a racist cop who thought he held all the power. What the officer didn't know: this boy's father was someone he'd never dare cross. It started as an ordinary day for this teenager, walking home from school. But one officer's bias turned it into a nightmare. Accused of a crime he didn't commit, the boy was handcuffed, ridiculed, and treated like a criminal. The officer assumed he was just another powerless kid, but the truth was far more shocking. By the time they reached the courthouse, everyone's jaws dropped at what was revealed. What happens when someone who abuses their power faces consequences they never expected? This story isn't just about one boy or one cop, it's a reflection of something much bigger. Stay tuned. The day started like any other for 15-year-old Malik, a quiet, ambitious high school sophomore who had big dreams of becoming a lawyer. He was walking home from school, carrying his books and daydreaming about his future, when a police cruiser pulled up beside him. Inside was Officer Daniels, a man known in the neighborhood for his aggressive and biased policing tactics. Malik didn't know it then, but his life was about to change in ways he never expected. Officer Daniels rolled down his window and immediately started questioning Malik, accusing him of looking suspicious. Malik was confused. "Suspicious for what?" he asked politely, though his voice trembled slightly. Daniels didn't answer. Instead, he stepped out of the car, placed a firm hand on Malik's shoulder, and demanded his ID. Malik hesitated, his heart pounding in his chest. He didn't have anything to hide, but something about Daniels' tone felt hostile and threatening. Daniels wasn't interested in explanations. Within minutes, he claimed Malik fit the description of someone involved in a nearby theft, a vague accusation Daniels had used countless times to target young black boys in the area. Before Malik could fully process what was happening, he was shoved against the hood of the police car, handcuffed, and read his rights. People in the neighborhood started gathering, some pulling out their phones to record the scene. Malik felt humiliated and powerless. He kept trying to explain that he had just left school, but Daniels wasn't listening. "You're lying," Daniels barked. "You kids are all the same." For Malik, the biggest challenge wasn't just the arrest, it was the feeling that no one would believe him. He thought about how often stories like his end in silence, where the victim's side is never heard. What made this worse was Daniels' confidence. The officer acted as though he had absolute authority, sneering as if daring anyone to challenge him. At the station, Malik was interrogated for hours without a guardian or lawyer present. Daniels painted him as a troublemaker, despite having no evidence to back up his claims. Malik tried to stay calm, but the fear was overwhelming. He thought of his family, wondering how his mother would react when she found out. She had always told him to be careful, to stay out of trouble, and to avoid confrontations with the police. Yet here he was, in the very situation she had warned him about. Daniels, meanwhile, continued to act with arrogance. He filed a report filled with lies, claiming Malik had resisted arrest and was behaving aggressively. Malik's pleas to tell the truth fell on deaf ears. To Daniels, Malik was just another black teenager, someone who wouldn't fight back and whose voice wouldn't matter in the system. But Daniels' overconfidence blinded him to one crucial detail. Malik wasn't just anyone. His father, Chief Robert Carter, was the head of the city's police department. Malik had deliberately kept his identity hidden during the arrest, hoping to handle the situation fairly without his father's influence. What Daniels didn't know was that Malik's family had already been contacted by a witness at the scene. When Malik's mother, Erica, arrived at the station, she demanded answers. Her presence was fierce, and her words cut through the air like a knife. "Where is my son? What have you done to him?" she asked, her voice trembling with equal parts fear and anger. Daniels brushed her off, treating her with the same disdain he had shown Malik. The real turning point came when Chief Carter walked into the station. The moment Daniels saw him, the smug look on his face began to crumble. For the first time, he realized he had made a grave mistake. The challenges Malik had faced, the racial profiling, the mistreatment, the humiliation, were now about to be exposed for the world to see. In this moment, Malik's story became more than just about him. It highlighted the systemic issues within law enforcement, where officers like Daniels operated with unchecked power. Malik's challenge wasn't just surviving this ordeal, it was becoming a symbol for everyone who had been treated unfairly but never got the chance to speak out. This wasn't just about one boy and one officer. It was about the countless others who had faced the same injustice and were still waiting for accountability. Malik's fight wasn't over, but he had already taken the first step toward change. As the events unfolded, Malik sat in the dimly lit interrogation room, his hands still cuffed behind his back. The cold metal chair beneath him was as uncomfortable as the knot of fear tightening in his stomach. He couldn't understand how his ordinary walk home had turned into this nightmare. But the worst part? The complete silence that surrounded him. No one came to check on him. No one asked for his side of the story. It was as if he didn't exist. Meanwhile, outside the room, Officer Daniels was busy building his version of events. He added false charges to Malik's record, claiming the boy had been aggressive and uncooperative. "He looked like trouble the second I saw him," Daniels bragged to a colleague, fully convinced that this case would end like so many others, a young black boy's voice lost in the system. But Daniels underestimated Malik's family. Erica, Malik's mother, wasn't the kind of woman who would let this slide. The moment she received the call from a concerned neighbor about her son's arrest, she dropped everything and rushed to the station. She wasn't alone either. The neighbor had posted a short video of the arrest online, and it was already starting to gain traction. By the time Erica arrived at the precinct, dozens of angry comments were flooding in. "This is unacceptable. Typical profiling. When will this stop?" Inside the station, Erica demanded to see her son, but Daniels brushed her off, treating her with the same dismissiveness he had shown Malik. "He's being processed. You can wait like everyone else," Daniels sneered, fully unaware of who he was dealing with. Erica wasn't just Malik's mother. She was also the wife of Police Chief Robert Carter. And she wasn't about to let her son be another statistic. While Erica was fighting to see Malik, the neighbor's video was spreading across social media like wildfire. The footage showed Daniels pulling Malik against the car, handcuffing him, and mocking him as a crowd gathered. The hashtag #JusticeForMalik began trending within hours, with people calling for accountability and transparency. Back in the interrogation room, Malik sat quietly, replaying the events in his head. He felt angry, confused, and helpless. But he also knew that his parents wouldn't stop until the truth came out. What he didn't know was that his father had just been alerted to the situation, and he wasn't happy. Chief Carter was in the middle of a meeting when his phone buzzed repeatedly with messages and missed calls. When he finally checked his phone, his heart sank. Seeing his son's face in a viral video, cuffed and humiliated, was enough to make his blood boil. He immediately canceled the meeting and headed to the precinct. By the time Chief Carter arrived, the atmosphere in the station had shifted. Erica was already there, her voice sharp and unwavering as she confronted the officers at the front desk. "I want to see my son. Now," she repeated, her words cutting through the room like a blade. When Daniel saw Chief Carter walk in, his confidence wavered for the first time. He didn't yet realize the connection between Malik and the police chief, but Carter's presence was enough to make him uneasy. The room fell silent as Carter approached, his face unreadable, but his tone icy. "Where is my son?" he asked, staring directly at Daniels. The realization hit Daniels like a freight train. His arrogant smirk disappeared, replaced by a look of panic. Your son?" he stammered, his mind racing to piece together what had just unraveled. In the hours that followed, the story began to take shape. Witnesses from the scene came forward, providing statements that contradicted everything Daniels had claimed. Malik's teachers even showed up, confirming that he had been at school all day and could not have been involved in the alleged theft. As the truth came out, Daniels' behavior was exposed for what it was: blatant racial profiling. His record was pulled, revealing a troubling history of complaints from community members, most of whom were black. Each detail chipped away at his credibility, and the public outrage only grew louder. Social media played a massive role in pushing the story forward. The hashtag #JusticeFormula wasn't just trending, it was dominating every platform. News outlets picked up the video, running stories about the systemic racism within the police force and the abuse of power by officers like Daniels. The video showed what words alone could never capture: a young black boy being treated as a criminal simply because of the color of his skin. Meanwhile, Chief Carter made it clear that there would be consequences. Daniels was placed on immediate leave pending an investigation, but that wasn't enough for the public. People demanded action, accountability, and justice, not just for Malik, but for every victim of police bias and misconduct. Malik's ordeal had turned into a much larger movement. What started as one boy's unjust arrest was now a spotlight on a broken system. Malik, who had felt so small and powerless in that interrogation room, was now the center of a conversation that was forcing people to confront uncomfortable truths. As the pressure mounted, Daniels began to realize the walls were closing in. He had spent years abusing his power, but this time he couldn't escape the consequences. And for Malik, this was more than just a personal victory. It was a moment of change, a step toward justice, and a message to every person who had ever been silenced: your voice matters. The moment Chief Carter stepped into the precinct, the atmosphere was electric. Everyone, from the junior officers to the receptionist, could feel the tension crackling in the air. Officer Daniels, who had been so smug just hours earlier, now looked pale and shaken. He was beginning to understand that this wasn't going to be another incident he could sweep under the rug. Chief Carter didn't waste time. His voice was firm, his words precise. "Where is my son?" he demanded, his eyes locked on Daniels. The room fell silent as Daniels stuttered, trying to find a way out. He's in the holding area, sir," Daniels finally muttered. The arrogance he had displayed earlier was gone, replaced by panic. Carter turned to the officers nearby. "I want him released now," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. Within minutes, Malik was brought out, his hands still cuffed. When he saw his father, his heart swelled with relief, but the humiliation of the ordeal was still fresh. Chief Carter immediately ordered the cuffs removed. "You've done enough damage for one day," he said sharply to Daniels. But this wasn't just about getting Malik out of the station, it was about justice. As Malik's mother embraced him, Carter turned his full attention to Daniels. "Officer Daniels," he began, his voice cold and steady, "you've not only arrested my son under false pretenses, but you've also violated the trust this community places in its police force. This ends today." Daniels tried to defend himself. "Sir," he matched the description of. Carter cut him off. "Don't. Just don't. I've seen the video. I've read the report. And I know exactly what you've been doing in this community for years." Daniels froze, realizing there was no escape from the truth. Meanwhile, The video of Malik's arrest was continuing to spread online, with news outlets picking up the story. Reporters were already gathering outside the precinct, and the hashtag #JusticeForMalik had reached millions of people. Protesters began to assemble, carrying signs that read, "End police racism" and "Justice for all." The pressure was mounting, and it was clear this wasn't going away. Inside the station, Chief Carter made his next move. He ordered an immediate review of Daniel's record, which revealed a long history of complaints about racial profiling and excessive force. These complaints, which had been ignored or dismissed for years, were now front and center. Carter knew that firing Daniels wouldn't be enough. This was bigger than one officer. The entire department's handling of racial bias needed to be addressed. As Carter confronted Daniels, Malik watched silently, still processing the whirlwind of events. For the first time, he saw his father not just as his dad, but as a man fighting for what was right. It was a powerful moment that Malik would never forget. The turning point came when Carter called a press conference right outside the precinct. Standing in front of the gathered crowd and reporters, he didn't mince words. "What happened to my son is unacceptable. But let me be clear, this isn't just about him. This is about every young black boy or girl who has been unfairly targeted, harassed, or silenced by those who are supposed to protect them. We must do better." Carter announced that Daniels had been placed on leave pending a full investigation and promised sweeping changes to address systemic racism within the police force. The crowd erupted in applause, but Carter knew that words alone wouldn't be enough. Actions had to follow. Daniels, meanwhile, was escorted out of the precinct, his head low as cameras captured his walk of shame. Protesters booed, and reporters shouted questions he refused to answer. It was a stark contrast to the confident, arrogant man who had arrested Malik just hours earlier. For Malik, this was a moment of vindication. Seeing Daniels face consequences was a step toward justice, but it didn't erase the pain he had endured. As he and his family left the precinct, they were met with cheers from the crowd. Malik held his head high, determined not to let this experience define him as a victim, but as a survivor. In the days that followed, the story continued to dominate headlines. The public demanded not only accountability for Daniels, but also broader reforms within the police department. Protests grew, with people of all backgrounds coming together to call for change. Chief Carter remained at the forefront, working tirelessly to ensure that real progress was made. He implemented mandatory bias training for all officers, created a community oversight board, and opened an anonymous reporting system for misconduct. These measures weren't a complete solution, but they were a start. As for Malik, he found strength in the support he received from his family and the community. What had started as a nightmare had turned into a movement, one that he hoped would prevent others from experiencing the same injustice. He decided to speak out, sharing his story in interviews and at rallies, becoming a voice for change. The arrest may have been a low point, but the aftermath was something extraordinary: a community united, a corrupt officer held accountable, and a step forward in the fight for equality. It wasn't the end, but it was a powerful beginning. Malik's arrest wasn't just a personal ordeal, it became a symbol of the systemic racism that plagues law enforcement. Officer Daniels' arrogance and misconduct exposed the deep flaws in a system meant to protect, not harm. Thanks to Malik's family's determination and the community's support, accountability was demanded and changes began. But this isn't the end. It's a reminder of how many untold stories like Malik's exist. Justice is a journey, not a destination, and Malik's story is a step toward change. Let this serve as a wake-up call. No abuse of power should go unchecked, and every voice deserves to be heard. If stories like this matter to you, Subscribe for more eye-opening content.